Good evening, everybody. This is Marty from Dawgs blog with tonight's podcast on Happy Valentine's Day, everybody, February 14th, 2019. Um, Everybody, I'm sure, heard the noon report. PRAVEEN SINGH still on the stand, and we got started around 1:35 this afternoon. Not too bad. They had a couple issues to talk about. It was minor housekeeping stuff. To tell you the truth, I didn't even take notes on it. And the jury came up at 1:52. Um, Marlissa Ferrer went back into um, direct with PRAVEEN SINGH talking about the double-decker bus that Frank Harson was hanging around on his property, sleeping allegedly in the bus and stuff. And she asked him if he had PRAVEEN SINGH had ever talked to Robert Woody or the Outlaws, which he said he had not. He had never told anybody else about the bus until those late interviews in 2018. She asked him in regards to if Stephen Duden ever uh, say what work he was doing for Frank Carson. He kind of had a funny look on his face, and he kept saying, well, he was doing private investigator work, doing investigations. She was looking for something, and he wasn't quite catching on, so she started going into leading questions. But Steve Duden never said what type of investigating he was doing with for Frank Carson. He said that Steve Duden never said anything about tracking cars with GPS trackers, but he did have GPS devices in his office. So he said Steve Duden was tracking some vehicles, but he wasn't really clear on what he was saying, if he was doing that for Frank Carson or it was just something else that he was doing. Um, After a few questions, he finally said no, he never said it was for Frank Carson. He was answering, it's like an area that he wasn't sure about and he was a little confused about. Finally, he said Frank Carson never said he was doing it for Frank Carson. She asked him if he told Steve Jacobson that Duden had put trackers on cars for Carson. He didn't recall that, and refreshing with transcript, he says Steve Duden said he did put tracking devices on vehicles. There was no specific reason given, and he couldn't recall what it was done for. She asked him again about when Corey Kaufman went missing, 2012, and was that about the time that Steve Duden was putting trackers for Frank Carson? Before or after Corey Kaufman went missing? He did not recall if it was prior to him going missing or not. She asked PRAVEEN SINGH again if he had told Steve Jacobson that. Again, he did not recall. Refreshing with the transcript of the interview. And he had said something that kind of didn't make sense to me. I guess they were making sense out of it. But he said it was, he learned when the investigators were looking at what was going on, he never knew who was being tracked. Steve Duden had accessed his computer to track vehicles in the office. He never saw trackers on the cell phone, any tracking done on the cell phone, or any pictures on the cell phone. He was asked about anything that Frank Carson said about the people that lived behind him, meaning the Cooley residents. And Frank Carson described them as dirtbags. or I think he said dirtbags or defecators, or it was something like that. I forget exactly how it was said. He said that Jack Abel was also working for Frank Carson during the investigation by law enforcement. He does not recall how he knew that. He said he never had conversations in regards to that, but then kind of turned around and contradicted himself. Uh, Jack Abel had come to the office one day and they went into a room to privately to talk, and so he's not didn't really know what was said. They were concerned about, and Jack Abel also came to the office because they were concerned about the phones being tapped in the office, and apparently he did a sweep or something. So he said that Frank Carson said he was concerned about the investigation on the homicide, so the phones might be tapped. Praveen Singh said he was also being investigated himself. He said that Frank Carson had a shotgun in his truck, but he never seen it taken out of the truck. She asked if he had seen Frank Carson with any type of gun. He said he did not recall. Then he turned around and said, "Well, yeah, he did see um, uh, a small handgun was seen with Carson, but he didn't recall when." He said that Frank Carson did say he wanted to, or was willing to shoot somebody in the yard if they got caught. Again, he had to read transcripts to refresh to get everything straight in his story. And what he said was Frank Carson said he would shoot motherfuckers. He said that Frank Carson looked upset and frustrated when he made that comment. And Frank Carson was said he had an ongoing problem with thefts, and but now the problem was solved. He didn't know what that meant. He never knew if Frank Carson was still staying at the property at night. He told Steve Jacobson Frank Carson had hired Jack Abel to investigate why they were being investigated. He discussed being investigated for the homicide because Praveen Singh was actually largely investigated in this thing. Frank Carson said he didn't do anything. Don't worry. Um, and he didn't recall exactly when he found out Corey Kaufman was found. But Frank Carson had told Praveen Singh to have bail ready for if they got arrested for the homicide. And Frank Carson repeated they will be taken into custody. He also told him to find an attorney. Um, so she recapped and said Frank Carson said they'll be arrested and to get an attorney and prepare bail for himself and Frank Carson. He'd said that he took care of the paperwork, but it was never went through because they knew that the bail would be no bail anyway. So he never put the papers in place. Um, she asked if he ever discussed with Frank Carson um, the thefts that were going on and the people and what he told investigators. There's an objection there that the question was asked really poorly, um, and it really didn't make sense to me. But he was talking about in a discussion that he had in 2012 with Frank Carson in the office, and he did not recall what he told investigators. That he was Gonna have to kind of be refreshed on everything. He's not as bad as Woody, but he's almost. And he said that Frank Carson was always upset that the thefts um, and the motherfuckers um, cops aren't doing anything. Um, and this conversation, what he said, well, again, was in 2012. Frank Carson had a cell phone in 2012. Um, he would call Frank Carson on that cell phone, and she asked him, did he call in on different numbers? Uh, and apparently they both got throwaway or burner phones, as they call them. He says in 2012, 2013, they got burner phones. Frank Carson got one first, and then he got one, and he said it was due to the phones being wiretapped. Persine, Praveen Singh gave the investigator Frank Carson's burner phone number, and she showed him a picture. It was a picture of a cell phone. He said that was his burner phone. He gave investigators permission to go through his phone for numbers, and he was unable to remember Frank Carson's number, but he said he turned around and said the only number ever called on that phone was Frank Carson. He never called anyone else. She was asking him about Christine DiFilippo for some reason. She was staying on 9th Street. And he became aware through the office talk that Frank Carson had been staying several nights out on the property, in the back lot of the property. Um, he said, Christine Filippo said um, that Georgia had told Praveen Singh that Frank Carson was in the back, and he does not recall what Frank Carson did with his burner phone. So he's saying there was a conversation in the office and between somebody and Georgia DiFilippo, and Christine DiFilippo overheard that Frank Carson was staying on the back property. Um, he said that Frank Carson wouldn't talk on the phone, and he wouldn't talk on the burner phone, and he was using that burner phone before Corey Kaufman. I mean, before he was taken into custody. Um, in this case, um, she got really confused in some of the questions she was asking, referring to Marlissa Ferrer, and she asked if you could recall Frank Carson using burner before or after. Um, and I think they were talking about the disappearance of Corey Kaufman. There was objections, and she kind of had to do it all over again. Um, she asked him if they were using burner phones prior to his, meaning Praveen Singh's arrest. Yes. And she asked something about who was the first to be arrested. There was objection. It went to a sidebar, and that all went away. Um, he also talked about that Frank Carson had called him on the phone and told him he was going to run for district attorney. And Frank Carson had told him on the phone, it was during the phone call, they had told him, and then he had talked to him the next day. He said, Praveen Singh said, Frank Carson said he was going to run for district attorney so not to be arrested. If he was arrested, if he was district attorney, it had to be done by the feds or somebody else. He said he didn't say much on the phone due to being wiretapped. And um, and again, he said the feds would have to process or take over the case and process the case because if he was district attorney. um, Melissa Ferrer asked him if he ever talked to Frank Carson in regards to talking to the police and reporting his problems. He said, yeah, of course, he had. In 2013 to 2016, um, he had gone to talking about Praveen Singh, had gone to talk to Kurt Bunch, and he had told Frank Carson that. And Frank Carson says, never talk to the police. You can't trust them. He didn't recall anything else he said. Again, refreshed with a transcript. And he said that Frank Carson says, don't go talk to those idiots. He did not recall talking about Corey Kaufman. He didn't ask. He asked if he talked to an investigator working for Percy Martinez in 2014. Again, there was an objection. There was a long sidebar. I have no idea what it was about, but it kind of put an end to that area of questions. She asked him if he recalls Frank Carson saying around 11 of November of 2013, after the call that telling him he's going to run for DA, he met the next day, and then he says, well, I don't really recall if it was the next day now or not. She asked him, did he ask any questions or anything that would want him to he would want to meet him with in regards to that? He didn't recall. I got refreshed again, and then he said he asked Frank Carson how much money do they make as a DA. He said Frank Carson said it so he wouldn't be arrested. She asked him if he talked to Michael Cooley. He said no. What did you talk to Charlie Odell? He said no. Praveen Singh said he asked why he was being blamed, and Carson said that Cooley is the one that did this, and Cooley's the one deflecting blame. He talked about, he told investigators that Jack Abel had got information from the jail, and he's talking about the Jack Abel had actually gone to interview Charlie Odell about one case and ended up talking about this other case with Corey Kaufman. And apparently Frank Carson had told Praveen Singh about what Odell said at the jail. He also said that Frank Carson said they are barking on the wrong tree in this one. They're going after the wrong people. He said he never told anyone Frank Carson took care of the problem, quote unquote. He had numerous contacts with investigators, meaning Praveen Singh did. And he was being told, or he was being accused of being involved in the homicide. He was upset, and the investigators should do things the right way and not the way they're doing it. They went into his temple saying lies about him, meaning the investigators did. And apparently they were just looking for some Indian guys to pin this on. He was asked if Frank Carson ever brought up the Atwalls. He said no. He was not even aware of the Atwalls' relationship until later on. He did talk to Frank Carson after learning of his relationship with the Atwalls, where there's an objection over that. And Judge Ania asked for the location of the text that Marlissa Ferreira was working from, and she said no, she's just throwing it out there. She's just kind of winging it as she goes. So she didn't want to say where she was getting this information. As for all we know, she could have been picking it out of her backside. Praveen Singh said he never had a problem with Ryan Schmidt, Georgia DiFilippo, Christine DiFilippo, and then there was no problems at all with all these people after Frank said the problem had been taken care of. Asking if Frank Carson ever talked about Christine DiFilippo, he didn't recall. He said, but he did know that police had been talking to Christine DiFilippo, and she was upset. Frank Carson was upset that he didn't want anybody talking to police. They make stuff up. And he again had to refresh his with transcript of the interviews that he gave. Frank Carson didn't talk to the police. Um, he says the police did come, but he told them he wouldn't talk to them. He told them to put their questions in writing. Um, he had never told investigators that Frank Carson gave him a direct order. Of course, he never really recalled that. Refreshing with a transcript of the interview. And then he said Frank Carson ordered him to not talk to police. Again, he said Frank Carson said the police tried to talk to him by going to his office, and he had told them to put it in writing, and he said they never did. Frank Carson wanted everything in writing always. He was asked if Frank Carson had ever called in on the neighbors. He said, oh, probably 3 or 4 times. Again, refresh with a transcript. Um, he says now that he called police 10 to 15 times after he said he had taken care of the problem. No more calls or thefts, or calls to the police or thefts. She asked him, he said if they were arrested, what did Frank Carson say what they will do? He said Frank Carson said there will be no bail in this case. Again, refreshing. Um, and he said that Frank Carson said they would work him over. Um, it was a little after 4 at that time. That it was the end of the day. Praveen Singh more than willing to talk about his lifelong friend, and I think that's interesting. You decide for yourself what you think it's worth. Um, we are. Don't forget my PayPal buttons on on the bottom of each report. Um, the information is on the website to snail mail. It's Post Office Box 1115 in Houston, California 95326. PayPal. Got my sponsor, Merced Tile Supply. Um, Good guy over there. You need tile down there, Merced. It's on Highway 59 in Merced. Good guy. He'll take care of you, Merced Tile Supply. So that's all I get. All I got for tonight. Don't forget if you have any questions or anything else, don't forget to um, uh, send me a question. You can email your questions. You can put it on Facebook. You can put it at the bottom of the reports on the website when you read the report or listen to the report. However you want to do it, I'll get to them. And somebody else is probably asking the same questions. It might help somebody else out too. So, but the biggest thing is, I want to emphasize this enough is it's not. Don't take my word for it. Come to court. and find out for yourself. Good night, everybody.